Twins Daniel and David have always made all the important decisions together since they were kids. They both chose to work as mechanics, cheered for the same sports team, and often finished each other's sentences. No one could have guessed that one day the brothers would plan an almost perfect crime together. After all, even if the police had managed to find traces of DNA, the prosecutor would not have been able to convince a jury of Dan or David's guilt. Standard forensic DNA analysis, as of today, cannot distinguish between identical twins because they have virtually identical genetic profiles, and a jury will always have room for reasonable doubt. It took law enforcement officials 10 years to catch the brothers. It was only because David decided to make a deal with the prosecutor and testified against Daniel that the police were able to solve the case that will be discussed today. On July 22, 2003, the car of her husband, with whom the 30-year-old woman was in the process of divorce, drove up to the house of Heather's parents. The final divorce hearing was only a week away. The man got out of the car with a huge bouquet of flowers and a card with a touching picture, heading toward the house, hoping that he would still be able to reconcile and avoid divorce. The reason to keep the marriage alive was not because of his great love for his spouse or his desire to keep the family cozy. Daniel realized the court decision to pay alimony will not leave money for his usual life. Perhaps he even lost the house. The man was desperately looking for a way out and expected to solve the problem with a bouquet of flowers and promises. The plan failed. Heather firmly rejected Daniel's proposal. The conversation turned violent, and Heather's father, Dave Springer, even had to intervene. Only after Dave promised to call the police did Daniel angrily yell that Heather was ruining his life and leave the house. Springer, a former member of the Denver Police Department, realized by some special instinct that his son-in-law was dangerous to his daughter. He asked her not to see him for the rest of the divorce proceedings. He would later say, "I was worried about what my son-in-law Dan DeWild might do as the final divorce approached." He wanted to keep things under his control, but control was slipping away from him, and he was becoming more and more desperate, more and more hostile. I told Heather not to date him, and I didn't think she would, but she did. 2 days later, Dan called Heather and offered to pick up the children's medical records and a signed child support check. Initially, the now almost ex-spouses agreed to meet at McDonald's. The young woman did not want to be alone with her ex-husband and planned to meet in a crowded place, taking her 2 children, who were 5 and 3 years old at the time. She didn't say anything to the father, alerting only the mother to the meeting. Obviously, something went wrong. The plan changed, or she originally named the nearest fast food restaurant as the meeting place to appease her mother. But Heather went not to McDonald's, but to Daniel's home in Edgewater, Colorado, where he lived at the time with his identical twin brother David and David's then-girlfriend Roseanne. Heather felt that in the presence of the children, Jacob and Hannah, their father would not be aggressive, and he was not alone at home. And then the young woman disappeared. She was never seen alive again. Heather Springer was born on April 21, 1973 in Arvada, Colorado. The head of the household, David Springer, who worked for the Denver Police Department, was respected by his colleagues and was highly regarded as a professional in his field. The man did everything possible to make sure that his beloved wife, Carol, Heather, and her 2 older sisters, Rebecca and Jennifer, nothing needed. The family had a friendly, warm atmosphere of mutual understanding. For her sisters, their father was a model of masculinity, responsibility, and care. In her youth, Heather tried to build relationships with her peers, but nothing much came out. When she met Dan DeWild, who was 10 years older than her, she saw in him an adult, responsible, caring man, and felt as calm and safe as with her father. Daniel, being a mature man, was winning in Heather's eyes compared to his peers. The 23-year-old young woman fell in love without looking back. The couple began dating in 1996, and a year later, Dan made an offer, which Heather gladly accepted. She grew up in a family where her father, due to his professional activities, always showed control, and the same quality in the groom she automatically considered a manifestation of love and protection. Unfortunately, she was mistaken. The young couple moved to the town of Edgewater, Colorado, where Dan owned a home. 2 children were born to the DeWild family, Hannah and Jacob. Heather devoted herself completely to her daughter and son, doing the household chores. Dan, as the main breadwinner of the family, worked as a mechanic in the transportation department. However, in family life was not all cloudless. Gradually, the young woman realized that Dan's excessive control is not a manifestation of care and love. Over time, he only became more overwhelming and restrictive. Dreams of a happy union did not materialize. After 5 years of marriage in 2002, Heather began to complain to her parents about her husband. She said that she was tired of Dan's constant control. It was simply unbearable to live with him in the same house. A year later, in the spring of 2003, the young woman informed Dan that she wanted a divorce. She packed her things and moved with her children to her parents' house in Arvada. Dan reacted very negatively to her still legal spouse's actions and even threatened her, which only strengthened her decision to protect her interests and those of her children. She filed for divorce, sought custody of the children, and had her husband pay child support. The situation became stressful for Daniel because he was not prepared for the additional considerable financial obligations. He was afraid that he would not be able to pay the bills and would likely lose his home. In early summer, his brother David came to Dan's aid along with his roommate Roseanne to provide support and help with the difficult situation. Dan and David DeWild, identical twins with only a minute and a half difference in age, have been inseparable all their lives, helping each other, constantly keeping in touch. Friends of the twins noted that Dan always acted as a leader, making key decisions, while David preferred to stay in the shadow of his brother and occupy secondary positions. After arriving, David started working as a mechanic at the same place where Dan worked and gave a significant amount of money to his brother to pay the house bills. It was David who suggested that Dan try to prevent a final divorce and supported his idea of going to see Heather on July 22, 2003. The trip, as is already known, ended in failure and almost calling the police. The brothers then devised a new plan, inviting Heather to their home on July 24th. The distance from Heather's parents' house and to the nearest McDonald's was only a few kilometers. The daughter, who had only gone to pick up her papers, should have returned long ago. When an hour passed, Heather's mom, Carol Springer, became concerned. Her daughter wasn't picking up her cell phone, and Carol called her son-in-law to find out where Heather was. Dan reported that she had arrived at his house, left the kids, and drove off in her car to the store. All of this seemed alarming to Carol, since she knew her daughter's wallet and credit cards were left at home. She couldn't go shopping without the money and cards, and she certainly would never leave her grandchildren with Dan. Freezing with a bad feeling, an agitated Carol dialed Dave's number and told him who their daughter had gone to see and when. Dave Springer immediately went to his former son-in-law's house. Heather wasn't there, and her car was nowhere to be found either. Dan still maintained that Heather had gone away on her own business, leaving the children with him, and should be back soon. The grandchildren couldn't tell their grandparents where their mom was or where she had gone. Dave called the emergency services. With his experience as a police officer, he sensed that his daughter was in trouble. Soon patrol officers arrived at Dan DeWild's house. The officers inspected the area near the house and the house itself, which Dan allowed to enter, but found nothing suspicious outside or inside, then left. The only thing the officers were able to find out was that the medical records Heather had come for were at Dan's house, and the child support check was still unsigned. Dave Springer got behind the wheel of his auto and began driving the city streets, hoping to find his daughter alive. Passing intersections, he stopped his gaze on passers-by, looked at the faces of women, interviewed local residents, but the search was fruitless. The next morning, July 25th, Heather DeWild was officially reported missing. Detective Mark Kreider of the Denver Police Department joined the search for the woman. The detective took Dave's suspicions seriously. No one believed that Heather simply decided to run away on vacation from her family. Already after the trial, Kreider told reporters, "Dave was obviously extremely concerned. The case was unusual because the daughter of a Denver police officer was missing, and that personalized the situation a little bit." Mark Kreider's first stop was the DeWild home. The detective arrived at the address, rang the doorbell. Dan DeWild himself appeared on the doorstep. He wouldn't let the detective into the house. Without DeWild's cooperation, Kreider had no right to inspect the house, which meant that important evidence could be missed. The detective asked what the reason for the refusal was, and why DeWild was unwilling to help the investigation if things were as he said they were. Dan replied that he had a personal attorney and would only answer questions in his presence. At that moment, David, Dan's twin, drove up to the house. Dan immediately called out to his brother, telling him not to engage in conversation with the detective. As Kreider watched, he realized that Heather's father was right. Daniel DeWild was hiding something. Why did he hire a lawyer if Heather just got tired of the family and left? He's not at all worried about the woman or looking for her, even though he swore his love for her a few days ago. Everything seemed as strange as possible, but the detective couldn't do anything without a warrant, and he had to leave. By the time police obtained a search warrant for DeWild's home, Heather had been missing for 6 days. Inside the home, Kreider said, the task force found no evidence of a crime weapon, nor was there any indication that Heather had been in the house. But investigators soon learned that on the day the young woman disappeared, David drove his Chevrolet car to an auto repair shop about 15 miles from the house. Why would David drive that far when the twins worked for the transportation department as mechanics and could have handled the car repairs themselves? Kreider got a warrant to look at the Chevrolet. Detectives speculated that perhaps Heather was dead, and David had managed to hide her body away from home. To conduct an inspection of the car, they brought in specially trained dogs that reacted to the odor of a decomposing body. While checking David's car, the dogs began barking near the driver's side rear side door, indicating that Heather's body may have been in the car for some time. Detective Kreider met and spoke with David and described the search dog's reactions. At one point, the detective, looking directly into David's eyes, asked, "Did you kill Heather?" The man lowered his head and you could see how nervous he was. The man said he needed to talk to his lawyer and left. After talking to David, the detective had no doubt that both twin brothers were involved in Heather's disappearance. A day after receiving news that the dog smelled decomposition, David and Roseanne married, solidifying the police's suspicions. Roseanne later revealed that it happened so suddenly, just in case, because spouses are not required to testify against each other. Then, on August 4th, 2003, 2 weeks after Heather's disappearance, police found a white Nissan Sentra belonging to the missing Heather in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, about 5 miles from Dam's home. According to locals, the car had been parked there for several days, with the passenger side window completely open. Detectives spent all day scrutinizing the car. It appeared so clean that there was no evidence that even Heather had ever ridden in it. We found no evidence of Heather's DNA inside or outside the car. We also found no fingerprints or anything else that would indicate that Heather had used the vehicle, the expert explained to Detective Kreider. Apparently, the perpetrator or perpetrators were careful and wiped out all traces qualitatively. Investigators searched the wooded area south of the apartment complex where the car was found. They used trackers, thermal imaging cameras, and a police helicopter. The search, to their dismay, yielded no clues that could lead to Heather. It was at that moment that Carol and Dave realized they had lost their daughter forever. Exactly 1 month later, on September 4th, 2003, Heather's body was discovered by a road worker shoveling dirt on the road to the canyon. He noticed a large trash bag in the ground, and when he got closer, he called the police. In the meantime, the body had decomposed so badly that dental records had to be used for identification. The woman's face was covered with a mask made of duct tape, and rope was wrapped around her neck and wrists. The body was wrapped in garbage bags and secured with duct tape before being placed in a shallow grave. Family members identified the clothing as the one Heather left in to meet Daniel on July 24th. The medical examiner was unable to determine Heather's exact cause of death, but the nature of her injuries suggested that she was strangled or died of asphyxiation. Investigators realized that the twins were involved. The location where the body was found was in the same neighborhood as the workshop that David visited the day Heather disappeared. The trash bags in which the body was wrapped matched the general class characteristics of the bags taken from the DeWild home. But it was circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence was lacking, and Kreider couldn't apprehend even one of the brothers, let alone both of them. Dave Springer felt crushed by the impossibility of doing anything. Heather was buried. Her parents placed a note in their daughter's casket with the phrase, "All she wanted was to love and be loved." There was a languid wait. No one told Heather's parents and sisters about the details of the investigation. It even began to seem to them that no one was dealing with the case at all. In fact, the investigation understood who was guilty, but the lack of evidence tied the hands of detectives. After 2 years, in 2005, in Denver changed the district attorney, who promised the Springer family to help in the investigation of the case. The formed investigation team once again thoroughly reviewed 1,500 pages of documentation and re-examined all the evidence and details of the case. However, these efforts yielded no new results. There was no physical evidence. DNA analysis did not reveal any links between the brothers and Heather's death. Detectives believed that in addition to the brothers to the case could be involved, and David's wife, Roseanne, who also lived in the house. But as an official spouse, she had the right not to disclose information about her husband, and so another 4 years passed. Heather's family still did not find a place. The father of the deceased admitted that sometimes he screams at night. He was sickened by the fact that Dan was sleeping peacefully on the loose, while their entire family was facing daily injustice. In 2009, the Heather DeWild investigation was taken over by Russ Boot Wright. The new prosecutor took the task with the utmost seriousness. In 6 years, the volume of documentation grew from 1.5 to 30,000 pages. There were 15 additional boxes with important details. After a while, a DVD of home movies caught the attention of the new investigative team. It turned out that during their marriage, Dan and Heather had engaged in unusual practices. Dan played the dominant role and Heather willingly submitted. Dan liked to tie Heather up. When detectives examined the home videotape, they discovered an important coincidence. The way Dan was tying Heather up in this footage was very similar to the way the woman was tied up when her body was discovered. Detectives also identified Dan's profile on a dating site where he listed himself as a widower, even though Heather was reported missing at the time and her body had not yet been found. During the investigation, they were able to find a witness who had seen Dan, David, and Roseanne early one morning, near the spot where Heather's body was later found. In addition, thanks to new technology that has emerged in recent years, experts were able to reinvestigate phone conversations between David, Daniel, and Roseanne on the day of the crime. All three made 14 calls to each other, and detectives have now been able to find out the geographical location of each caller. David's cell phone was used right near where Heather's car was found, and from there he called his brother, and then Roseanne. Combining all of the information obtained, detectives brought the perpetrators to justice. With only circumstantial evidence, more than 8 years after the crime was committed, Dan, David, and Roseanne DeWild were arrested on December 14, 2011. Each was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. As prosecutors prepared for trial, investigators hoped to somehow provoke the DeWilds. They hypothesized that Roseanne might be the weak link and tried to turn her against the brothers. It didn't work. The woman continued to claim that neither she nor the twins were involved in the crime. Dan, David, and Roseanne spent 8 months behind bars awaiting trial. The first to break down was David. 9 years after the crime, the man confessed that Heather took the life of his twin brother Dan. Maybe it was the arrest, the billing records, or maybe he really loved Roseanne and wanted to get her out of harm's way by making a deal with the prosecutor. Or maybe he just analyzed everything and chose freedom after 12 years rather than waiting a lifetime for sentencing. Either way, David took the deal. If it wasn't for his testimony, the brothers probably would have gotten away with the crime. David gave all the gruesome details. According to the man, his brother Dan began planning the crime back in April 2003, after he was ordered to pay child support. He carefully thought out every move he made. When Dan told David about his plan and asked for help, he said that in case of refusal, he would still get rid of Heather, but only alone. David admitted that he was afraid for his brother. He thought that Dan couldn't do it alone. He would be caught and put in jail immediately, so David agreed to help. According to the plan, Heather and the children arrived at noon on July 24, 2003. When Dan went to meet them, David allegedly tried to stop his brother, but he didn't listen. While the children played in the house, Dan took Heather to the garage, promising to return the now almost ex-wife's joint videos, which were allegedly stored there. In the garage, Dan grabbed Heather by the shoulders and threw her to the floor. According to David, he could have prevented the crime but didn't, continuing to just stand there and watch in silence. His brother took a hammer from the shelf and struck Heather several blows to the head, rendering her unconscious. Immediately after that, Dan took a rope, tied his wife up the same way he had tied her up during their intimate games, but this time he made a noose around her neck as well, and then suspended her from the garage roof. Dan's plan was that he wanted to make it look like his wife's death was an accident during their role-playing sessions. Leaving Dan in the garage, David drove Heather's car back to the apartment complex parking lot and thoroughly wiped the car down inside and out. By the time David returned to the garage, his brother had already wrapped his wife's body in garbage bags and placed it in the back seat of David's car. David checked the woman's pulse and made sure she was dead. He then got behind the wheel of the Chevrolet and drove to the pre-planned location where he was going to bury the body. Heather might never have been found if it hadn't been for a transmission problem in the car that forced him to hide the body elsewhere on the way to the canyon. Because David had to stop by an auto repair shop to get his car fixed, the investigation got clues about the car's movements. When asked by the investigators how the brothers managed to get rid of all the evidence so professionally, David said that they regularly watched crime programs on TV, and they gave a lot of information on these issues. For example, they used double gloves to leave no traces. David DeWild had to take a polygraph to confirm the veracity of his testimony. After the test, prosecutors offered him a deal. David pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit second-degree murder and received 12 years instead of life in prison. In November 2012, Daniel's trial began at the Jefferson County Courthouse. David testified, blamed the crime entirely on his brother, rehabilitated his wife Roseanne through his testimony, apologized for all the pain he had caused to Heather's family, and received 12 years. Daniel pleaded not guilty and continued to insist he did not know where Heather went after she allegedly left the house. His defense claimed that Heather took his brother David's life. After all, by his own admission, he was the one who disposed of the car and the body, but the jury didn't believe that version. They found Daniel guilty of conspiracy to commit a first-degree felony, but couldn't decide if he actually did it. Because of this, the judge set a new trial date. Just a month later, fearing he would end up in prison with no chance of parole, Dan accepted a plea deal, pleaded guilty to a second-degree felony, and waived his right to appeal. He was sentenced to 74 years in prison, which he continues to serve in Colorado State Prison. He will become eligible for parole in May 2045. His mandatory release year is 2084, when he will be over 100 years old. Daniel DeWild will likely not live to see that date. After the trial, prosecutor Raz Boot Wright said at a press conference, "Looking at the dynamics of what happened, it's pretty clear that Daniel set David up. He was in control of the situation. As for Mary Roseanne DeWild, we ultimately concluded that her knowledge of the events was less than previously thought. The case against her is dismissed as there is no reasonable likelihood of her conviction at trial. Roseanne continues to maintain that she didn't suspect anything and is waiting for David to be released." After Dan's arrest, Hannah and Jacob were taken into foster care by their own grandparents, Heather's parents. Dave Springer, Heather's father, has finally begun to sleep well at night. The case of Matthew Winkler, Secrets of a Religious Family. Sometimes the most horrible and unpredictable crimes are committed in seemingly perfect families. Of course, even in the most prosperous unit of society can come crisis, which will be unnoticed by others, but literally poison the lives of all members of the family and eventually lead to tragedy. The Winklers, in the town of Selmer, were considered by many to be a model family. The young pastor, his wife, and their 3 daughters looked happy, had everything they needed for a comfortable life, were healthy and successful, but in a quiet pool, as they say. In this case, many questions remained unanswered because we heard only one version of what happened, and the story itself became the subject of the book, Sex and Murder: Secrets of a Pastor. March 22, 2006, the small town of Selmer, Tennessee, shook the terrible news. A 31-year-old pastor named Matthew Winkler was brutally murdered in his own home, and his wife Mary and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna disappeared without a trace. That day, the preacher of the Church of Christ did not show up for the evening service where he was supposed to attend with his family. This circumstance seemed strange and suspicious, because Matthew was always very responsible and could not miss the planned event without informing anyone. None of the family members also answered the phone, which was even more disturbing. Alarmed community members decided to go to the Winklers' residence to find out what had happened and if they needed help. From the outside, the house looked normal. The windows and doors were intact, and nothing suspicious was visible. Inside, there were lights on in several rooms, and they could hear a television playing quite loudly in one of the rooms. It gave the impression that the owners of the house were busy doing their own thing. The front door was locked, but no one answered the knock. Phone calls also went unanswered, and through the curtained windows, it was impossible to see what was going on inside or if anyone was there. However, even though the whole situation was quite strange, no one was in a hurry to call the police. Instead, a call was made to an elder of the religious community who advised them to look for a spare key and open the door themselves. It took another hour and a half, and when members of the community were finally able to get inside the house, they found an eerie scene. Everything in the house was in its place. There was no sign of intruders, but the owners were nowhere to be seen either. Everything seemed normal until the visitors looked into the marital bedroom. There on the floor, in a pool of his own blood, lay the pastor's body. There was a huge hole in his back from a gunshot wound. Blood spattered everywhere, and bloody foam dried on his face. By then, the body had already cooled and stiffened. It was obvious that Matthew had been lying there for many hours and had probably been killed in the morning because he was dressed in his pajamas. It was only after this that a call was made to the police. By the time the police arrived, a whole crowd of neighbors, churchgoers, and casual passers-by had gathered in and around the house, interested in what was going on. All of these people had left their fingerprints at the crime scene. They left their fingerprints and shoe prints, erased or trampled possible evidence, greatly complicating the work of investigators. The police took the body for forensic examination and found that the pastor was killed by a single shot in the back, fired from a large caliber weapon. He died a few minutes after the wound, from massive blood loss, unable to call for help. It was simply impossible to establish definitively whether there were any strangers in the house at that time, because the people who had arrived before the police arrived had literally destroyed all traces of them. The picture of the crime was quite strange, and those who could shed any light on what happened disappeared. The fate of the wife and daughters of the murdered man remained unknown. The police assumed that the women and children could have been kidnapped or also killed. By the way, the family minivan Winklers also disappeared from the garage. A massive search was launched and the state issued a yellow alert. This meant that children were missing, and all citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. But let's break this whole story down from the beginning. Matthew Bryan Winkler was born in 1974, November 21st, in the picturesque country town of Henderson, Tennessee, and was the youngest of 3 sons of Dan and Diane Winkler. Our hero and his 2 older brothers, James and Daniel, grew up in a rather conservative Christian family. Their parents were very religious and brought up their sons in strictness and obedience. It is worth noting that Matthew became a minister of the church in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at one time. The father, to top it all off, ran the local preacher's school and was a man respected and influential in his hometown. In their younger years, the Winkler brothers attended Sunday school and were active in church activities. In addition, Matthew in high school was seriously interested in soccer, and everyone who saw his game on the field noted that he had talent and he could well become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, later the young man decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. Since the preaching activity of the head of the family was associated with frequent travel, his wife and children almost always followed him. Because of this, Matthew changed several schools in his childhood, but the active, communicative, and friendly child quickly made friends and gained authority everywhere. When the boy finished school, his family lived in a small city called Austin, located in the state of Texas. Matthew was a creative person, had a powerful charisma, but here are some outstanding achievements in studies could not boast. After graduating from high school, he entered the college Fried Hardeman and successfully completed it. In parallel, the young man began to try his hand as a pastor, under the careful guidance of his father. Matthew was the youth minister of the Central Church of Christ in the city of McMinnville. He was later appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler, maiden name Freeman, was born in December 1973 in Geist Township, Tennessee, and was the oldest of 2 daughters to her parents. She was also raised in a deeply religious family, with strict rules. The head of the family for many years served as a pastor in the Christian church, where the girl attended Sunday school. A few years later, a second daughter was born to the family and named Patricia. Unfortunately, the girl was born prematurely and had a number of serious health problems, including cerebral palsy, encephalitis, epilepsy, and mental retardation. For many years, the parents did not want to put up with the disappointing diagnoses of the child and desperately tried to treat her, agreeing even to experimental therapy. However, it did not bring any particular improvement. Mary tenderly loved her little sister, always treated her with awe and cared for her as best she could. But in 1987, when 10-year-old Patricia was bathing in the bathtub, her older sister was only a minute away to take something from the bathing accessories, and at that very moment, the girl had another epileptic seizure. When Mary returned to the room, her sister was no longer breathing, and all attempts to resuscitate her had come to nothing. For a 13-year-old girl, it was a huge shock and the first loss in her life. She blamed herself for the tragedy and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Teachers who saw the deplorable state of Mary sent her to the school psychologist, working with whom she helped. But her father, learning about what was happening, made a scandal and forbade his daughter to go to these sessions, saying that such problems are discussed only within the family. In fact, the girl never received real moral support from her parents. Mary grew up modest and quite shy. She tried to avoid any conflicts, and after the tragic death of her little sister, she became withdrawn. Since her father did not allow her to seek help from a specialist, the trauma over the years has resulted in serious psychological problems. After the death of Patricia, the parents decided to adopt a little girl named Charlotte, who was from a dysfunctional large family. Soon the couple was also allowed to take custody of Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister, so the family was reunited in their new home. Mary was once again the older sister and took care of the younger children while helping her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler, family life. The future spouses met soon after Matthew graduated from high school. The guy was prominent, handsome, athletic, and enjoyed great popularity with the opposite sex, but to spin novels right and left, he did not allow a strict religious upbringing. The young people immediately developed a liking for each other, which quickly grew into love. For both of them, it was the first strong feeling in their lives, and after a couple of months they met each other's parents, and having received their blessing, began to plan a wedding. In April 1994, the lovers got married. When the family had an older daughter, Patricia, the head of the family was still in college and was forced to leave school for a while. He took a job at a construction site, but long there did not last because he was not used to hard physical labor. During this period, for the first time, made himself aware of the difficult character of Matthew. He was often angry with others, irritated at small things, and sometimes he could not control his anger. But Mary tried not to complain and not to tell anyone about what was happening in her family. A meek young woman, brought up in the spirit of patriarchy, obeyed her husband in everything. At first, the Winklers lived near the house of Mary's parents, so she was able to see them regularly. But soon Mrs. Freeman was diagnosed with cancer, which rapidly progressed, and in just a few months, she literally burned from the disease. It was another shock for Mary, and the care of her underage siblings now fell on her shoulders. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Mary was pregnant again at that time. But soon after the birth of their second daughter, the family moved to another city, where they bought their own small house. After the move, Mary was completely absorbed in the care of the baby and almost stopped communicating with her father, as well as with younger brothers and sisters who were too demanding and constantly needed attention. In addition, the young mother began to suffer from severe postpartum depression. Everyone who was closely acquainted with the family Winkler noted some oddities in the character and behavior of Mary. The young woman was characterized as an introvert and even sociophobic. She did not communicate with anyone. It was difficult for her to make new acquaintances, much less friendships. She suffered from mood swings, was prone to melancholy, and any little thing could bring her to tears. While Matthew was building his career as a pastor, his wife became increasingly withdrawn. The situation became even more complicated when Mary once again became pregnant, and a few months later, she learned that the fetus had died in her womb. Such news strongly shook Mary, who was looking forward to the appearance of this child and very much dreamed of a large, friendly family. Again, to see the long-awaited 2 stripes on the pregnancy test she could only 2 years later, and her happiness was unbounded. This time, Mary hid her pregnancy for a long time, as if afraid of something. She did so until her situation became obvious. Once again, everyone began to talk about Mary's strange behavior and pathological reticence. The strange behavior of Mrs. Winkler was associated not only with a severe psychological trauma she suffered in childhood, but also with a very unhealthy environment within her own family, which only undermined her already unstable nervous system. The head of the family was a man of authority and demanded unconditional obedience. Despite the fact that in public the Winklers looked like an ideal married couple, where there was trust, mutual respect, and harmony, in reality, their neighbors have repeatedly heard how the husband shouted and snapped at his wife for no apparent reason. No one could even imagine that a respected pastor could raise a hand on his wife until one day Mary had a huge black eye. Despite the fact that she denied the fact of domestic violence and said that it was an accident, the city quickly spread rumors about the cruelty of a young creature who beats the mother of his children. In addition, Matthew at some point developed an irresistible urge to experiment in bed. He offered his wife to diversify their intimate life with role-playing games, adult toys, and so on. But for Mary, brought up in strictness with conservative views, such was unacceptable. She strongly restricted her husband in this, which infuriated him, and he repeatedly tried to get what he wanted by force. One day, after another abuse in bed, Mary called her only close friend in tears and complained to her about the situation. The friend, who promised to keep her secret, immediately blabbed about everything, which provoked a new wave of rumors and gossip about the unacceptable behavior of the clergyman. At that time, Matthew was up for promotion and aspired to be a local church leader, but he was rejected because of rapidly spreading unpleasant rumors about him. Moreover, he was also removed from his position in the Sunday school, where he had brought God's word to the children and was in good standing. This was requested by the parents, who had also heard about the pastor's peculiar predilections. All this forced the family to leave their residence and move to another city where they planned to start over. They settled in Silmer, where they quickly gained the love and respect of those around them. Matthew took a job as a church pastor again, and his wife found a part-time job to make a small contribution to the family income. And although the family was still not smooth, their neighbors, as well as the congregation of the church where Matthew preached, considered Mary and Matthew an ideal couple, and their family a model. Next door to the Winkler family lived a young married couple, with whom the couple quickly became friends. They often visited each other, celebrated holidays together, shared news and secrets. A few months before the tragedy, during a joint dinner at the pastor's house, Mary bragged to the neighbors that her husband had bought her a gun for self-defense and had already taken her to the shooting range several times to learn how to handle it confidently. Mary turned out to be quite a capable student, quickly mastered all the subtleties, and accurately shot at targets. Moreover, it turned out that the Winklers already had firearms in the house, which had been purchased by the pastor earlier, also for self-defense. The guests wondered why the pastor and his wife needed all this, because they live in a quiet town where they have no enemies, and everyone around them loves and respects their family. After another move of the couple, their financial situation left much to be desired. Mary was in search of various part-time jobs, and she also decided to get a medical degree to then get a job in a clinic and help sick children. Soon, Mary decided to improve the financial condition of their family through financial fraud. She herself later claimed that she did not realize that she was doing something illegal and was going to pay back all the money as soon as she got back on her feet. What Mary was doing is commonly referred to as artificially inflating account balances. Mrs. Winkler also received checks from unspecified sources and then deposited them into a bank account she and her husband owned. She then changed the address of the account so that all communications would be routed there. The total amount of checks she received was almost $17,000, which aroused certain suspicions of the bank employees who decided to invite the couple to the office branch to clarify the circumstances and resolve the situation. But the pastor and his wife never showed up at the bank, and this aroused even more suspicion. It was assumed that Matthew was not aware of what his wife was doing at all. However, after Matthew's death, his wife tried to prove in court that the whole story of fraud was his idea, and that it was he who forced her to make dubious transactions, while he himself remained in the shadows, without arousing suspicion. Where has Mary disappeared to? When Mr. Winkler was found murdered in his own home, his wife and daughters were put on the wanted list, fearing that they too might be in mortal danger. Initially, the meek, shy, and homely Mary was initially viewed solely as a possible victim of the crime. However, after talking to neighbors and receiving information from the bank about financial fraud, she became the main suspect in the murder of her own husband. It was necessary to find out as soon as possible where Mary had disappeared to, where the children were, and if they were all right. They, as well as their family car, were put on the wanted list. Attempts were also made to trace transactions made for Mary's bank card and to locate her location through her cell phone signal. Mary was found just a day later in an Alabama resort town where she and her children were having fun at a local amusement park. It was as if the mother wanted to give her children one last party, realizing that she would soon be going to prison and would see her girls very soon. When the family was taken to the police station to testify, the two older daughters confidently told the same story. According to them, intruders broke into the house and injured their dad, and their mom picked up a gun to protect them. They were then forced to run for their lives. According to the girls, their father was alive and in the hospital, and they were soon to go and see him and return home. What exactly happened in the house, as it turned out, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not see, and learned about the events from the words of their mother. They only heard a gunshot and glimpsed their father lying on the floor, and then their mother put them in the car, and they drove away. Mary almost immediately began to confess, but she claimed that she could not reconstruct the entire chain of events of that day, referring to the temporary blur. According to her, her spouse had abused her for years, humiliating her and inducing her to forms of intimacy that were unacceptable to her. Mary insisted that it was he who had initiated the financial scam she had perpetrated. Matthew demanded total obedience, easily lost his temper, and once gave the will of his fists. This was confirmed by Matthew's secretary at his previous place of employment. The woman repeatedly witnessed how the pastor insulted his wife, who carefully brought him lunch to church, but he was always dissatisfied with something. The evening before the tragedy, there was another scandal in the family, because of which the spouses went to bed in separate rooms. Mary cried all night, and in the morning she did not realize how in her hands was a shotgun, which her husband kept loaded. She entered Matthew's room and shot him in the back while he was still lying in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloody foam oozing from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, her husband, while still alive, whispered, "Why?" To which she replied, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mary then took her daughters and left the house, and her husband, as experts have established, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but he no longer had the strength to do so. By the way, the weapon of crime was found in the trunk of the car on which Mary left with the children. For what purpose she took it with her, Mrs. Winkler also could not answer. At the trial, the role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's humiliation and moral abuse of his wife. Upon seeing them, Mary turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite the fact that she confused her testimony and told several different versions of what happened, the court agreed that she was the victim of a domestic tyrant, and the murder was the result of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not absolve Mary of responsibility for what she had done. In April 2007, the court delivered its final verdict in this complicated and confusing case. Mrs. Winkler was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but her mental state raised many questions. It was originally expected that the young woman would be sent to prison for at least 6 years, but in the end, she was given a sentence of less than 1 year. She spent 2 months of that sentence in a psychiatric hospital, where experts were trying to determine whether she could regain custody of her children upon release. In the summer of 2008, Mary was given sole custody of her daughters, who all this time lived with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were extremely upset by this circumstance. They believed that their daughter-in-law had deliberately killed their son and suffered virtually no punishment for it, and now their granddaughters were given full custody of her. However, all their numerous attempts to file appeals had failed. As for the fraud case, it never went to trial. The bank never filed formal charges, and the whole story was dropped. You have to admit that death can sometimes be around every corner, that no one can ever predict where this meeting will take place, in a warm home, or on a dark and deserted street, or maybe, which certainly seems unlikely to many of you, even during a family dinner. However, there are exceptions to every story. Canny Ong's story is just such a story. Is this really possible? You ask. How could a simple family dinner end in a brutal murder that will shock all Malaysians, and the local authorities will even review the current legislation? Let's take a look at this case. Full name of the heroine, Canny Ong Lake Yang. She was born in 1974 in the Malaysian city of Ipoh, in a large family. And even though the city is considered a rather remarkable place for tourists, but Canny herself dreamed of something else, a prestigious job, traveling, and what else could a young woman dream of? Of course, all this couldn't just fall from the sky. She had to strive for her dream, and she understood that. First, Canny graduated from high school with a gold medal, then went to university in Hawaii, where she even got a degree in economics. The beginning was made, and it was necessary to develop further, and she, being already independent, went to Los Angeles, where she got a job in an advertising agency. The City of Dreams gave the young girl self-realization as a specialist in her field. It was there in 2001 that Canny met Brandon Ong, who, just like her father, was born in Singapore, but left there with his family to America as a child and was now rightfully considered an American. Young Canny and Brandon got married pretty quickly and moved to the neighboring city of San Diego. But only 2 years into their life together, there was an accident. Canny's father fell ill with liver cancer. Her father was going to have a serious surgery in Malaysia, and it was not quite clear whether he would survive after such an operation or not. So Canny quickly packed her things, and on June 1st, leaving her husband in America, flew to her father. Fortunately, the operation was successful. The disease receded. The doctors assured that B-Gen, as Canny's father was called, would live for a long time and would surely wait for grandchildren. Canny exhaled with relief. Finally, it was safe to return to her beloved husband and her favorite job. She took a morning flight to Los Angeles, and in the evening, Canny invited her extended family to a farewell dinner at their favorite restaurant called Monty's, where they had gone on holidays when Canny still lived with her parents. During dinner, Canny's mom suddenly didn't feel well, and her caring daughter offered to drive her home. In the parking lot, she looked for a parking ticket in her purse for a long time, and when she couldn't find it, she decided that she had simply forgotten it in the interior of the car. So Canny asked her sisters to watch her mother and ran to the car. She was gone for a long time. Her mother even decided to go to the car herself, but Canny's car was not there, and neither was her daughter's. Then one of the sisters started to call Canny's phone, but it, even more alarmingly, turned out to be switched off. The family knew Canny very well. She couldn't afford to just disappear, and even if something had happened, she was sure to call and warn her family. But what could have happened in a closed parking lot, literally 300 feet from her family? Kenny's father went to the security guards and asked them to show the security footage. At first, there was nothing strange. His daughter walking toward the car, checking her pockets, looking in her purse for her keys. But then they noticed that behind Kenny there was a stranger moving behind him, and like Kenny, he was slowing down and speeding up. Already from another camera, the guards together with the worried father watched Kenny's car leaving the parking lot. But behind the wheel was a man, most likely the one who followed her in the parking lot, but Kenny herself, strangely enough, was sitting in the passenger seat. It all looked like a kidnapping, and the family immediately called the police. It should be given credit. The Malaysian police began the search for the missing woman as soon as they received information on the stolen car, and in a couple of hours, one of the highway patrol noticed a car on the road, which matched the description. In order not to frighten the possible perpetrator, and at the time, they did not fully understand whether it was a kidnapping or not, the police patrol stopped the car to check the documents. The car stopped. The driver was visibly nervous, but still with a smile gave the policeman his license, and Kenny, who was sitting next to him, tried to give the policeman some signs, but he was checking the driver's documents. Unfortunately, he did not understand it, but the kidnapper paid attention to it, and he pressed the gas pedal to the floor and drove away from the patrol car. The police tried to shoot at the trail, but to no avail. The car fled, but they still had the documents of the kidnapper, 27-year-old Ahmad Najib bin Aris. Let me tell you a brief biography of this guy. Ahmad was born in 1976 and grew up in Mor, Malaysia. He was the second of 4 siblings in the family. Ahmad Najib studied until the 3rd year of secondary school before dropping out, not continuing the last 2 years of secondary education. Secondary education in Malaysia lasts 5 years because he had to work to feed his family and was a hard worker. In 1998, he came from Muar to Kuala Lumpur. Later, Ahmad Najib was married and had 2 children. According to people who knew him, Ahmad Najib was a man of good character and responsible in his work. And now back to our case. After a while, it turned out that the shooting at the car did not go without result. A young man approached the police and told a strange story. He said that during dinner at a roadside cafe, an unknown guy approached him and said that he was going on vacation with his wife, but on the road he punctured a tire and now they could not go further. The young man gladly decided to help the stranger. They went outside. He took a jack out of the trunk, gave it to the traveler, but he noticed bullet marks on the car, and on the front seat he saw a frightened woman, hardly looking like a wife going on a carefree vacation with her beloved husband. The so-called husband himself did not change the tire, but only fiddled with the jack for a while, grumbled, and gave it back. The police immediately realized that it was Kenny and her kidnapper was Ahmad. However, that was the last time Kenny was seen alive. Kenny Ong, or rather her body, would be found only 3 days later in a sewer manhole near a construction site, almost burned to the ground. As the autopsy will show, the woman was first stabbed in the stomach several times and later strangled. Also, not far from the construction site, will be found in Kemi's car, with a punctured or rather shot tire and with blood stains on the back seat. The police, who had the killer's documents in their possession, for some reason decided to go to the address where Ahmad lived only after the body was found. The amazing thing about this story is that the killer was at home and living a very ordinary life, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not stolen someone else's car, as if he had not kidnapped a woman who had come to visit her father during his illness, and finally, as if he had not driven away from the police officers who were shooting at him. Later, after Ahmad's arrest, forensic tests would prove that in addition to Kenny's blood, Ahmad's own DNA was in the car. We would like to clarify that in Malaysia, murders, especially such brutal ones, are extremely rare. The point is that according to the criminal code, a murderer is entitled to the highest punishment, not even life imprisonment, but the death penalty. It is unclear what Ahmad hoped for, knowing that the police have all the data on him, but he confessed everything, and even decided to help the investigation, counting on the fact that it will save him from death. Naturally, the brutal criminal put on the mask of an innocent sheep. At the trial, he said that that night in the parking lot, he was looking for a completely different woman, but mistaken, and realized it only when he was riding with Kenny in the car. According to him, they even laughed together about the situation, and later he tried to get her to have sex with him, and again, according to him, Kenny was not even against it, and the strangulation marks on her neck were just part of the woman's sexual fantasy, which is why she died. A terrified Ahmad decided to dispose of the body and set Kenny on fire. This story was made up from start to finish by Ahmad's lawyers, because in such a case he would have been awarded only abuse of the deceased, or at worst negligent homicide, given that Kenny had asked to be strangled herself during the intimate encounter. And supposedly, if this is not true, if all this is just a fantasy of the defendant, then why the captive did not run away while her captor was changing the tire, the lawyers said. Such a version could sound even convincing, if it were not for the stab wounds in the abdomen. It was at this point that the whole defense fell apart like a house of cards. It was obvious, because the investigation had a different, more reliable, autopsy-confirmed view of what had happened. Ahmad saw a lone woman in the parking lot outside Monty's restaurant and followed her. When Kenny opened her car, he threatened her with a knife, ordered her into the passenger seat, and got behind the wheel himself. After that encounter with police officers and a failed attempt to replace a blown tire, he drove the car to a deserted location, put a terrified Kenny in the back seat, and used her several times. Kenny tried to resist, for which she was stabbed several times in the stomach and later strangled with a coat belt. After the abuse, Ahmad took her already dead body outside and threw it into the first manhole, covering it with tires so that it would not be found. He returned to this manhole the next day with several canisters of gasoline and decided to finally hide the traces of the crime, filled Kenny's body with gasoline, and set it on fire. In addition, as it turned out later, Ahmad had 4 rapes against women who fortunately did not die, but still fearing conviction, did not file a police report. Finally, on February 23, 2005, the court, for some reason lasting for several years, finally sentenced the murderer and, among other things, gave Ahmad 10 lashes. But did this make it any easier for the parents who had lost their daughter forever? Being behind bars, Ahmad tried to appeal his sentence and even wrote a letter to Selangor, the head of state, asking him to pardon him, but of course he was refused. And only 13 years after Kenny's murder, Ahmad got what he deserved. On September 23, 2016, he was hanged right in his cell. As I said, this case was quite high profile in Malaysia. Residents were frightened not so much by the brutality of the murder itself, and Ahmad's seemingly empty belief in his impunity, but by the fact that it is not so difficult to kidnap a person in a crowded shopping center, albeit in a parking lot. To prevent this from happening again, the Malaysian authorities began to install as many CCTV cameras as possible around the country, increased the number of security guards in shopping centers, and even made parking spaces specifically for women. And in all this situation, it is very pathetic that for such measures it was necessary to sacrifice the life of an innocent woman who flew to her father for 2 weeks from tens of thousands of miles away. On December 1, 2022, the Mendoza Criminal Court stood waiting, holding its breath. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, and the surrounding area was filled with people waiting for the verdict. On the dock sat a woman aged 32, dressed in a black dress, with white beads around her neck. Her face expressed not a single emotion, and her eyes burned with only equanimity and restraint. She was preparing to hear the judgment that would determine her fate and leave a mark on history. Everyone in the room had known this woman for many years, but now they were faced with a mystery that was difficult for them to understand. Outside the courtroom doors, the approaching footsteps of the judge could be heard, like the pounding of a heart, echoing in the silence and felt in every corner of the place. Everyone knew that what was at stake today was not only the fate of the woman in the dock,
but also the truth that had remained in the shadows for so long. There was a whole story behind this woman, the events of which were as mysterious as she was. The truth of this real crime is hidden in the details, and the trial becomes a real challenge for all involved. Manado is a small town hidden among the mountains and valleys of the Argentine province of Mendoza. This is the place where nature reveals its most beautiful colors. In autumn, the streets are sprinkled with golden leaves, and the mountain peaks are painted in shades of orange and red. The residents of Manado know each other well, and everyone can tell the biography of their neighbors. Here, people share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult moments, and celebrate important events together. In this secluded place, among the mountains and valleys, Rolando Angeliquino and Karen Oviedo began a romance that would later shake Manado and all of Argentina. When the streets of the city, surrounded by colors of autumn gold, as if frozen in anticipation of something long awaited, the fates of the two young people of this story intertwined. Rolando Angeliquino, a man with a magnetism capable of attracting the attention of others, could not help but notice the exciting gaze of Karen Oviedo. She was a woman with fire in her eyes, a passion for life, and an energy that instantly won his heart. The young people were very similar in their interests and dreams, and the determination and entrepreneurial thirst of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness. Finally, they found in this relationship what they had been looking for in others for so long. So in 2016, the lovers started living together and opened their own business, a warehouse, which was located in the house where they lived. Karen has always had a special eye for detail, and she lovingly created a sign on one of the windows for customer service. Next to it were lists of items for sale. It was their little corner that they were rightfully proud of. The people of Manado watched this happy and determined couple with interest and respect. Everyone wondered who these young people were and how they managed to accomplish so much. Many people knew Karen from childhood, but Rolando remained a mystery. No one knew anything about his past, except that he came from Bolivia. Rolando not only ran the business with Karen, but also worked at the fair in Guimalin, where wholesale fruit sales were held. Looking at this couple, it seemed like they had found their little paradise on earth. But sometimes, even the strongest and most sincere relationships can face a test. One day, Rolando was taken aback when he caught Karen in the car with another man. His reaction was a flash of anger. In that moment, he nearly destroyed everything inside the interior of the car. The picture of happiness crumbled in a matter of minutes. But then, Rolando agreed to give them a chance, choosing to forgive and continue to move forward with his beloved. In the eyes of others, they remained a model of an ideal couple, able to overcome all difficulties together. Rolando Angeliquino is an enigmatic figure who was born in 1987 in Bolivia. His exact date of arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children in his family, Rolando learned from an early age the value of family bonds and hard work. His ideal was a happy family filled with joy and children's laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, from whom he later had a son. Despite the difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in his life appeared Soledad Guardio, who gave him another son, Elias. Relationships with Soledad also did not work out. However, Rolando was always a devoted father who took care of his children. He kept in touch and always maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children. From a young age, Rolando was a physically fit man who took care of his health by playing sports and playing soccer for the local team. Colleagues and loved ones described him as a kind and very hardworking man. Neighbors in his neighborhood got along well with him, but Rolando always showed a distinct shyness in socializing. Karen was born March 30th, 1990, and spent her childhood and youth in Manado, in the same house where she and Rolando later established their warehouse. She was well known among the locals as an outgoing and open-minded woman.
Like Rolando, Karen dreamed of a happy and successful family with a caring and devotedly loving man. However, It took her some time to find the one man with whom she could build her happiness. Before meeting Rolando, Karen had already attempted to create a happy relationship that resulted in the birth of two wonderful girls. One of her former partners, Raul Ojeda, became the father of one of them, and Karen married him in 2013. However, as time went on, that marriage was on the verge of breaking up. According to Raul, financial difficulties were one of the reasons for the conflict. Worried about his life and in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to leave his family. On the pretext of buying some necessary item, he fled the city and traveled abroad, changing buses to make it difficult to track his whereabouts. In this way, he sought to evade all attempts to locate him. In the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias arrived at Rolando and Karen's house. They had many plans for the near future that they wanted to spend together. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, when Rolando came to wish his son a good morning before leaving for work, he noticed that the boy was not feeling well. The father immediately decided to take his son to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. There, after examination, it became clear that Elias's condition is critical, and he was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, little Elias died shortly after he was brought to the hospital. The amazing thing was that he left home perfectly healthy, without any unusual symptoms, and arrived at his father's house also perfectly healthy. However, the medical report was devastating. It stated that Elias died of third-degree poisoning, which caused multi-organ failure and cerebral. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Karen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Karen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Karen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Karen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. But now the cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Karen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. The prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Karen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Karen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Karen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Karen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Karen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Karen's statement regarding the discarded vial.
Of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness.
She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Karen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Karen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Karen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias, at age 9, could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Karen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Karen insisted on cremating his body, but the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Karen Oviedo. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel. And in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to. In addition, Kimberly's own blood was not on the murder weapon or on her hands, which would be impossible if she had actually shot herself in the head with the gun to her chin. But there was a drop of her husband's blood on the thumb of her hand. On top of that, there were several searches on Christopher's work computer for detailed staging of the crime scene. Kimberly's physician also testified at the trial. stating that the young woman suffered from insomnia, headaches, and high blood pressure, for which she was prescribed a number of medications, but that she had no bad thoughts or desire to harm herself or others. The defendant was found guilty on each of the counts charged. For such a horrific crime, Christopher was sentenced to 4 life sentences, 1 for each family member, with no possibility of ever being released. Shortly after such a harsh sentence was handed down, Vaughn unexpectedly stated that he remembered in great detail the events of that day and had not lost his memory at all. According to him, shots rang out after he left the car, but he did not immediately realize what was happening. Then he saw the bodies of the children, and at that moment, his wife shot him in the leg. She shouted that it was all his fault, and then put a bullet in his head. The new testimony of the convict had no effect on the verdict because it sounded more than ridiculous. However, Christopher's parents have been actively trying to justify their son in the eyes of the public. For several years, they regularly take part in all sorts of talk shows, give interviews and blogs and social networks where they talk about how unhappy in marriage was their heir. They also systematically blame all the troubles on the Phillips family, whose members, according to them, from the very beginning, did not accept their son-in-law and did everything to turn his life into a nightmare.
The prosecution decided to address several questions to Karen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Karen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Karen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, according to psychologists, most often teenagers commit offenses for 3 reasons: the desire to assert themselves and gain authority among their peers, alcohol addiction or addiction to illegal drugs, but most importantly, a sense of impunity. Even for the most serious crimes, minors often receive minimal punishment because their young age is taken into account. In our story today, a schoolgirl named McKenzie Shirilla became the perpetrator of a terrible tragedy that took 2 lives at once. However, the girl herself did not feel remorse for her crime, and at the trial stated that she could do almost anything while staying alive, but she does not consider herself cool. McKenzie repeatedly changed her testimony, writing off everything on a lapse in memory, and apparently, until the last moment was confident that she would get away with it. But the verdict of the judge literally dumbfounded the young criminal and her mother, so desperately defending her daughter. But let's get to the bottom of this. Who is McKenzie Shirilla? McKenzie Shirilla was born in August 2004 in the quiet town of Strongsville, Ohio, and was the 3rd child in the family. Her parents, John Shirilla and Natalie Stevens, tried to bring up their heirs in love and care, to give them a good education and encourage all endeavors. The youngest daughter was a family favorite. She was forgiven many pranks from childhood, and even serious misdemeanors often got away with it. McKenzie grew up capricious, demanding, and selfish girl. She was used to the fact that parents always do as she requires, and was also confident in her own impunity no matter what she did. Classmates and teachers of the girl noted that in childhood she was quite a nice and open child, but with age, her character and behavior began to deteriorate. The girl threw real tantrums. If something went wrong, she easily lost her temper, behaved impudently and impatiently, swore, and could even get into a fight. McKenzie did not consider anyone's opinion but her own. Her word should always be the last, and she put her own interests above all else. In adolescence, the character of the girl became simply unbearable, but her parents did not see anything terrible in this, believing that her daughter has a transitional age, and she should be treated with understanding and patience. However, bad character was far from the worst of all the troubles. In high school, McKenzie was addicted to alcohol, as well as sometimes dabbled in illegal drugs, but she got away with it. Often the girl's actions were reckless and carried a direct threat not only to her, but also to the people around her. Parents still did not notice, or simply did not want to notice the obvious problem. Like many of her peers, McKenzie was a big fan of social media and literally never let her smartphone out of her hands. She often posted provocative pictures of herself smoking or drinking alcohol on her account, and she left equally provocative comments on them. McKenzie's friends were just like her. Together, they vandalized, organized pogroms, fights, sometimes stole, and several times came to the attention of the police. However, the young people were treated only with warnings and educational talks, which strengthened their belief in their own impunity. Dominique Rousseau, a young man named Dominic Rousseau, was also a native of Strongsville. He was born in September 2001 and was the fourth of 7 children to his parents, Frank and Christine Rousseau. The boy was raised with 3 brothers and 3 sisters, with whom he was always very close. Dominic studied well in school, from childhood years actively engaged in sports, and tried to lead a healthy lifestyle. Despite the fact that he grew up in a large family, neither he himself nor any of his brothers or sisters was not deprived of parental love, attention, and care. Spouses Frank and Christine were moderately strict with their children, but at the same time promoted their all-round development. Dominic always had a lot of friends. He was used to being in the center of attention and became the soul of any company. The young man had a bright and quite attractive appearance, was trim and interesting, so he also had a lot of admirers from a young age. However, he himself tried to avoid fleeting romances, emphasizing serious and promising relationships.
After graduating from high school, Rousseau became a student at a local university, choosing the specialization producer of performing arts. He dreamed of linking his life with music and one day becoming a famous music producer. In addition, the talented and versatile Dominic wrote and performed songs himself. By the age of 20, the guy already had his own small business. He bought a car and rented a separate apartment in a good neighborhood. At the same time, he continued to play sports and was considered one of the best students at the university. First love. Dominic and McKenzie met for the first time when the girl studied in the graduating class. It happened at one of the parties in the company of mutual friends, and this accidental meeting became fatal for both of them. Young people were complete opposites of each other, and opposites are known to attract. A handsome, curly-haired young man, well-versed in music, immediately attracted McKenzie's attention. He was radically different from the guys she usually socialized with. He was educated, well-mannered, interesting, and could easily hold a conversation on any topic. McKenzie herself had a striking appearance and slim figure, dressed well, and knew how to make the right impression. She turned on all her charm to draw the attention of the guys she liked, and she managed to achieve the desired rather quickly. In the fall of 2021, the couple began dating, and almost immediately each of them introduced the chosen one to their parents. But if McKenzie's parents were delighted with her choice and considered Dominic a brilliant couple for their daughter, the parents of the guy had mixed feelings about his passport. On the one hand, the girl looked sweet, innocent, and tried to make a good impression on them. But on the other hand, something in her immediately alerted Frank and Christine Rousseau. Friends and family members of Shirilla were sure that McKenzie, for the first time in her life, really fell in love, and sincerely hoped that the relationship with the chosen one will positively affect her character and behavior. Then no one could not even guess what tragedy would end this youthful romance. The couple began to appear everywhere together, holding hands and openly demonstrating their tender feelings for each other. So soon, the whole small town knew about the relationship. Those who knew McKenzie well sincerely felt sorry for her boyfriend, but most just happy for them. What was wrong with her? Soon Dominic began to notice oddities in his girlfriend's behavior, her defiant antics and desire to make everyone around her do only what she wants. At first, he did not focus too much attention on it, writing off everything on the young age and the desire to attract attention. The young people made plans for their future together, and even planned to get married as soon as McKenzie turned 18. They also planned to leave their native provincial town and together go to conquer a major metropolis, ideally, New York. There before Dominic would open a lot of opportunities to build a brilliant career in the music industry and fully reveal his talent. But as time went on, McKenzie's behavior became more and more alarming, and sometimes even frightened the guy. She demanded from her boyfriend that he did only what she wanted, and if he did not agree with her in something, she made scandals, threw tantrums, and behaved like a little capricious child. At first, Dominic tried to translate everything into a joke, but soon realized that this is the true face of his chosen one. In public, she was still trying to hold on, but being alone with her boyfriend spewed on him the whole storm of his emotions and sometimes even pounced on him with fists. Mackenzie's behavior became more and more aggressive, and at some point, the young man decided that he had enough. He suggested that she take a pause in the relationship and sort out her feelings. But upon hearing this, Mackenzie had a public showdown in front of their mutual friends. She screamed, threatened Dominic that she would kill him if he left her, threatened to burn down his house and wreck his car. But by doing so, she only made him feel more confident that he was doing the right thing by ending this toxic and unrewarding relationship. Obsessive stalking. Mackenzie had no intention of letting her boyfriend go, and at first she acted as if nothing had happened.
She continued to called him to various parties and other events, as well as exhibited in social networks of their joint photos, accompanying them with posts with declarations of love. When Dominic firmly told her that everything is over between them, she literally went mad with anger and rage. Mackenzie went to his house almost daily and shouted all sorts of nasty things, insults and threats under his windows. She called him from different numbers, left messages on his answering machine, wrote on social media and emailed him. Mackenzie then swore in love and offered to try to start all over again, then again began to insult and threats. Russo was confused. He simply did not know how to react to such behavior, because he had never encountered such behavior. He tried talking, tried to ignore the former lover, and a couple of times even recorded her threatening tantrums on his phone. It got to the point that Shirilla, seeing the ex-boyfriend on the street or in another public place, began to scream and insult him in front of passers-by. She turned Dominic's life into a real nightmare, but he still hoped that a little more time would pass and she would leave him alone, switching to someone else. One day, in front of witnesses, Mackenzie declared that it was easier for her to kill Dominic than to let him go. Mackenzie said that if he didn't come back to her, no one would have him, and she would take care of it. The young man did not take these words seriously, although those around him realized that Mackenzie was not joking. Among the most frequent threats from the mouth of the schoolgirl were promises to hit and run over the guy with a car, as well as to put him in the car and drive off a cliff or stop on the railroad in front of a train rushing at them. Each option sounded terrifying, and each of them Mackenzie described in detail, as if she had planned it all out long ago and was just waiting for the right moment. An unexpected reconciliation. When Mackenzie realized that threats and insults would not help her to get Dominic back, but only distanced him, she decided to change her tactics. Mackenzie became sweet and charming again, stopped pressuring and harassing her ex-boyfriend, and instead tried her best to pretend that she realized her mistakes and wanted to change for the better. She talked about the upcoming enrollment, asked to help her choose a university, and also claimed that she had gotten smart, and most of all was now concerned about the final exams. Such changes pleasantly surprised Dominic. He, in spite of everything, still had tender feelings for the former girlfriend, and decided out of kindness to help her with university enrollment. Therefore, they again began to see each other and communicate. Gradually, the couple became close again. Dominic began to invite Mackenzie on dates, sought to spend all his free time with her, and believed that she had changed, matured, became more serious and responsible. He did not notice how he fell in love with her again, and all the former offenses remained somewhere in the past. However, this time the young people were in no hurry to announce to all friends and acquaintances about their reunion. Their meetings were more like secret dates, where they just enjoyed each other's company, avoiding the close attention of others. When Dominic's own brother Angelo learned about what was happening, he suggested that nothing good would come of it, but the young man in love did not heed his words. A devious plan. While Dominic naively rejoiced at being reunited with his girlfriend and the changes he thought had happened to her, Mackenzie herself hatched a terrifying plan of reprisal against the young man. She was so fascinated by the idea of a car and a spectacular car crash that she began to work out this scenario in detail. In her free time, she spent hours driving around the city, choosing a place suitable for the realization of her plan. However, there were no high and steep cliffs nearby, and going out on the tracks while waiting for a train seemed to her an unreliable idea. One day, Shirilla drove into a nearby industrial area, a fairly secluded place with no cameras on the way, and very few cars in the area. The schoolgirl's attention was drawn to a huge brick wall, and her sick imagination immediately conjured up a new, no less horrible plan. She decided that if she accelerated to the maximum possible speed and crashed into the wall, it would be no less spectacular than falling off a cliff into an abyss. It should be noted that initially McKenzie planned to die together with her lover, so that their story was retold by all the inhabitants of the city. She even told her best friend about it, but her friend simply did not believe in the seriousness of her intentions, because McKenzie had visited such delusional ideas before, but everything was limited to empty conversations. A terrible realization of the plan and an accidental victim. At the end of July 2022, just a week before her coming of age, McKenzie suggested to Dominic that they go to an upcoming party hosted by their mutual friends. It would be a good opportunity to have fun, to unwind, and to let everyone know that they were back together and loved each other dearly. The young man readily agreed. He still didn't feel threatened by McKenzie and believed in the sincerity of her feelings and intentions. The event was scheduled for Saturday, July 30th. Dominic and McKenzie appeared in the middle of the party, holding hands, which immediately attracted the attention of those present. They looked happy, smiled, and openly showed affectionate feelings for each other. Friends were sincerely pleased with their reunion and noted that they are a very beautiful and harmonious couple. All evening and all night the young people had fun, willingly photographed and without shyness, kissed in front of everyone. But no one even guessed what a terrible tragedy would end this party. The couple drank a little, however, like everyone else at the event. But McKenzie, secretly from everyone, took a dose of illegal drugs, so to speak, for courage, so as not to change his mind, and at the last moment did not hit the brakes. In the morning, Russo and Shirilla said goodbye to everyone and headed for the car, but then a friend of the guy, Davian Flanagan, followed them and asked them to give him a ride home. McKenzie tried to object, saying they had plans of their own, but Dominic saw no problem with giving his friend a ride. Not wanting to fight, arouse suspicion, or change plans, McKenzie agreed, signing Davian's death warrant. Despite her lover's objections, McKenzie got behind the wheel of the car. Her boyfriend sat next to her in the passenger seat, and her friend sat behind him. The car started and slowly pulled away from the party venue, heading out on its most recent trip. On the main street, McKenzie drove quietly, keeping to the speed limit and trying not to draw attention to herself. At a stoplight, she stopped, though the road was empty. McKenzie once again considered her plan, while her passengers dozed off. She later claimed that she wanted to die in the accident, but the perpetrator was obviously lying because she had fastened her seatbelt during the last stop, while her passengers remained unbuckled. When the light turned green, she drove off, quickly picking up speed, and then took a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road leading into an industrial area. Obviously, the guys didn't immediately realize what was going on. If at all, it was as if the devil himself had possessed the driver. The car accelerated to top speed, but McKenzie continued to press hard on the gas pedal, steering the car into a blank brick wall. A bystander and a miraculous rescue. There wasn't a soul in the industrial area early Sunday morning, so no one saw the accident or rushed to help. Only one woman who lived on the outskirts, not far from the scene of the accident, heard the bang and was not too lazy to go outside to see what was the matter. She saw smoke, and when she got closer, she realized that there had been a car crash, after which she ran back inside to call emergency services. Medics arrived at the scene about half an hour after the accident, but the two guys in the car could not be helped. They died on the spot. The girl behind the wheel was alive. She was saved by her seatbelt and airbags. McKenzie was unconscious, and her legs were trapped in the mangled car, but she was breathing, and her pulse was clearly palpable, giving hope that she would survive. She opened her eyes several times during the process of being released from the car, but was obviously unaware of what was going on around her. McKenzie was immediately sent to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with a number of fractures and internal organ damage. Blood tests showed that she was under the influence of alcohol and drugs. However, according to the doctor, Perhaps that is what prevented her from dying from painful shock while help was on the way. Investigation, leads, and confession. Initially, the police, having received the results of McKenzie's tests, assumed that she, being under the influence of illegal substances, simply did not realize what she was doing and perhaps tried to drive through the wall or did not see any obstacles in her way. In favor of this version was the lack of braking distance. It was not possible to talk to Shirilla herself because she was unconscious in the intensive care unit after a complex operation. However, she soon came to her senses and, realizing what she had done, began to sob and pour out her soul to the doctor on duty. She admitted that she purposely drove into the wall at a great speed because she wanted to kill her boyfriend and originally planned to die with him. McKenzie also added that Davian was an accidental victim due to his own obsession because he asked to go with them. The doctor did not take the patient's rambling story seriously, deciding that it was a delusional state resulting from anesthesia and painkillers as well as guilt over the death of a loved one. And when the police were allowed to talk to the recovering McKenzie, she suddenly changed her testimony completely. Now McKenzie claimed that she remembered almost nothing about the events of that night because she took alcohol and illegal substances. According to the girl, she had a lapse in memory after she got behind the wheel, and how Davian was in the car, she has no idea. However, the facts were to the contrary. The surveillance cameras were able to track the first part of the route the car had taken, and the footage clearly showed that McKenzie was driving slowly and according to the rules, until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial zone. Moreover, it turned out that McKenzie had driven the entire route both ways several days earlier, and her car had been seen there at various times by at least a dozen witnesses. Back to normal. After being discharged from the hospital, McKenzie recovered quickly enough and tried to get back to her old, carefree life. She had no remorse and was confident that she could get away with it. McKenzie was once again active on social media, meeting with friends and making plans for the future. In September, she decided to go to a concert of her favorite band playing in a neighboring city. At that time, the bones of her legs had not yet fully fused, but this did not stop her, and she appeared on the concert stage in a wheelchair. At the same time, she wore bright makeup, dressed provocatively, took selfies with friends, and posted them on her account. In October, when Shirilla was on her feet, she went to a Halloween celebration dressed up in a pre-made costume. McKenzie lived life to the fullest and even made new acquaintances, but on November 4th, 2022, she was taken into custody. Trial and sentencing. It took the investigation just over 3 months to gather the necessary evidence and proof to bring the case to trial. McKenzie was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession and use of a controlled substance that was found in her pocket and detected in her blood. The defendant changed her testimony several times, first citing a lapse in memory, and then, when her friend testified in court as a witness, to whom she revealed her plan, McKenzie changed tactics, saying that she wanted to die with her lover. But even here there were immediately discovered inconsistencies because she had previously fastened herself with a seatbelt.
On August 21, 2023, Shirilla was found guilty of all charges. However, an important nuance was taken into account, namely, at the time of the crime, she was not yet 18 years old. It was 5 days before her majority, so she was tried as a minor. Under state law, she was entitled to at least 2 consecutive sentences of 15 years for each murder, without parole. But because of her young age, she was allowed to serve the 2 sentences concurrently, meaning she would be eligible for parole in 15 years. By then, McKenzie would be 33 years old. Both sides were unhappy with the court's decision. Family members of the deceased young people said they would seek a review of the case in order to increase the punishment, and parents and McKenzie's lawyer, on the contrary, considered the sentence too harsh and filed an appeal. However, the judge left the sentence unchanged, noting that he did not believe that Shirilla would leave prison after 15 years. The defendant herself, in his opinion, did not repent for the evil she had committed, behaved arrogantly and even insolently towards the court. But now she will have enough time to seriously consider her heinous act. Greed, envy, and the desire to get wealth without much effort often push people to commit the most heinous and cynical crimes. Sometimes it is hard to imagine what cruelty a person is capable of for the sake of quick enrichment, for example, the murder of a close relative. The story of Elizabeth Vasquez is truly shocking and horrifying. This kind and hard-working woman all her life worked for the good of her family, striving to give her beloved daughter all the best, including a good education. But the greedy heiress, along with her boyfriend, did the unthinkable. This complex case for several years stirred the press and shocked the public with its inhumanity, showing how a young woman can easily decide to kill her own mother. Let's try to understand how in a prosperous and well-to-do family grew a real monster, devoid of any feelings of pity, remorse, or conscience. The large and happy Vasquez family. In 1967, in the town of Cajamarca in northwestern Peru, a girl named Elizabeth Lillian Vasquez Movilla was born. She was the oldest of 6 children in the family of Ernesto Vasquez and Maria Movilla. Her parents were hard-working, simple people who worked hard to provide for their many offspring, give them an education and a chance at a better life. The Vasquez family was friendly and very happy, and from an early age, Elizabeth helped her mother take care of her younger siblings. She was an excellent student and graduated from school with honors, which allowed her to easily enter the prestigious university at the Faculty of Law and Economics. While at the university, she met a young man named Alejandro Mendez Espino, who was also studying law and was known as one of the top students in his class. A romantic relationship quickly developed between the two, which grew rapidly, and they were officially married in 1987, even before graduating from university. Elizabeth's parents approved of her choice from the very beginning and gladly accepted her son-in-law into the family. Alejandro was a serious, intelligent, ambitious, and very purposeful man who could take good care of their eldest daughter. At first, the newlyweds lived in the Vasquez family home, but after 6 months, when Elizabeth became pregnant, they decided to move into their separate home. Only daughter. Approximately a year after their marriage in 1988, the couple welcomed their only joint heir, whom they named after the mother, Elizabeth Vasquez Espino. Affectionately called Elita in the family, the girl became the center of attention for all her numerous relatives and the main joy of her parents. Several years after the birth of their daughter, the couple, whose careers were steadily ascending, decided to move to Peru's capital, Lima. By then, Alejandro was vying for a prosecutor position in an anti-corruption department, while Elizabeth had opened her own legal consulting firm. Both worked tirelessly for the benefit of their family, but unfortunately couldn't spend enough time with their young daughter. Confronted with an unsatisfactory experience hiring a nanny who didn't fulfill her duties conscientiously, the young mother decided to send her daughter to her parents in Cajamarca for them to take care of the heiress. Maria and Ernesto readily agreed and were overjoyed to have their granddaughter live with them for a while. Notably, their youngest daughter, Giovanna, Elita's aunt, was only a couple of years older than Elita, so they immediately got along and interacted like real sisters. Due to their total commitment to work, the parents rarely saw their daughter and compensated by showering her with gifts during visits. Elita's stay at her grandparents' home stretched over several years, and when her parents decided to bring her back to their home in Lima, she had already started school. It's worth noting that the abrupt change in environment did not benefit the girl, and she took quite some time to adapt to life in the bustling, noisy capital after the quiet, almost provincial Cajamarca. The challenging parent-daughter relationship. As a child, Elita was a quiet and well-behaved kid. She strove to excel academically, engaging in music and foreign languages. She shared a warm and trusting relationship with her parents, who tried to compensate for the years of enforced separation. Elizabeth aimed to be not just a mother, but also Elita's best friend, someone she could share her deepest thoughts with. This remained true until Elita turned 15. During her teenage years, Elita's character deteriorated rapidly. She became rude, threw tantrums, and stopped listening to her parents. She abandoned her studies, got involved with bad company, and worst of all, began stealing money from her parents' wallets. Elizabeth tried various approaches to connect with her daughter, hoping it was just a phase that Elita would outgrow. However, the girl regularly instigated heated arguments with her mother. ending in hysterics and tears. During these moments, Alejandro typically remained neutral, but if Elita sought his intervention, he often took her side. Elita was deeply hurt and offended by being constantly compared to her smart, beautiful, successful, and hard-working mother. Next to Elizabeth, Elita indeed appeared as the ugly duckling, being the complete opposite of her mother in every aspect. She lacked striking looks, was overweight, lazy, and temperamental, often lied, and didn't shy away from theft. Elita harbored numerous complexes about her appearance. When she expressed a desire for plastic surgery, Elizabeth, eager to please her daughter and mend their relationship, didn't dissuade her. Elizabeth financed an initial rhinoplasty for her daughter and, a few years later, several more surgeries. In 2007, after 20 years of marriage, Alejandro and Elizabeth decided to separate. Their 18-year-old daughter reacted with a hysterical outburst, screaming, insulting, and blaming her mother for driving her father away. At the time, the family was in the United States, and the divorce posed some complications for citizens of another country. Nonetheless, they returned home as divorced individuals and began living separately. By mutual agreement, the now adult but still dependent daughter stayed in her mother's house. They continued to have fierce arguments, and during such moments, Elita would call her father, crying and begging him to take her in. However, Alejandro, who had moved on with a new love, was not eager to do so. He always convinced Elita to reconcile with her mother and wait a bit longer until she finished university and started an independent life. Despite her plummeting academic performance, terrible character, and provocative behavior, Elita's parents ensured she enrolled in the law faculty of one of Peru's most prestigious universities. The education was costly, but her father and mother decided not to skimp on the education of their only child. Elita's unreliable boyfriend Elita had her fair share of teenage romances, but at 19, she fell genuinely in love for the first time. It all started one Sunday morning at church, where she met a charming young man named Fernando Gonzalez. He couldn't take his eyes off her during the service, and afterward, he approached her to introduce himself. To Elita, Fernando seemed like a prince, handsome, attentive, with a pleasant voice. He invited her for coffee and a chat. As it turned out, he had a habit of scouting churches for young, well-dressed girls who arrived in luxury cars, then would strike up a conversation, charm them, and play on their sympathies. He'd spin tales about his difficult childhood in a large family abandoned by their father, how he was now supporting his mother, brothers and sisters by working multiple jobs. Wealthy and naive girls would sympathize and give him money. Sometimes he managed to maintain a wealthy girlfriend for a few months, but typically, they'd leave him once the truth was revealed. He was just an unemployed slacker who loved the high life. Elita fell easily into Fernando's trap due to her complexes. Always considering herself unattractive, she couldn't believe such a handsome man noticed her and was ready to give him everything she had, or rather, everything her mother had. She opened up to her mother about everything, leading to their first candid conversation in years. Elizabeth thought she had a chance to mend their relationship, especially since Elita had met the boy in church, which seemed promising and assumed he must be a good person.
Upon their first meeting, Fernando managed to make a positive impression on Elizabeth. He told her his dramatic life story, and she believed him, deciding that such a good boy deserved help. She rented a cozy apartment for him near central Lima, agreeing to pay 70% of the monthly rent. She also paid for his business school tuition, promising him a job in her company later on. It seemed that Fernando gratefully accepted her generosity, ready to start studying. However, he had no interest in attending boring lectures or working. He just wanted to have fun and spend someone else's money. He gladly moved into the rented apartment but never paid anything towards it, claiming to be broke and promising to pay back later. Soon it became clear that Fernando only attended a couple of business school classes before quitting. After a serious talk with Elizabeth, he seemed remorseful. She decided to give him a second chance and employed him as a courier in her company. On his very first day, he not only failed to complete a simple task, but also betrayed other employees who had entrusted him with important documents. Elizabeth finally realized that this young man had charmed her daughter only to leech off her for his own needs. He had no intentions of studying or working. She then forbade Alita from seeing him, which provoked her daughter's anger and resentment. Alita screamed and cried, accusing her mother of trying to ruin her life and take away her happiness. She refused to listen to reason and insisted she would continue seeing Fernando. Failed attempt to separate the couple. Elizabeth decided to send her daughter to her parents' home for a while, naively believing that if Alita didn't see her boyfriend for a few months, her feelings would cool down, and Fernando would find another rich fool to exploit. But Elizabeth was greatly mistaken. Alita continued to communicate with her boyfriend through calls and social media, and her resentment towards her mother only grew. Fernando had to move out of the rental apartment after Elizabeth refused to pay for it. However, he found a smaller place, rented for him by his young lover with her mother's money. Alita had some financial freedom, being a spoiled child, and could freely use some of her mother's accounts. When the summer break ended and university resumed, Alita immediately rushed to meet her boyfriend, who once again asked her for money. She withdrew a substantial amount from her mother's account and gave it to him, leading to a serious confrontation with her mother later that evening upon noticing the missing funds. Elizabeth then decided to block Alita's access to her accounts, giving her only a small weekly allowance for personal expenses. This decision further strained their already tense relationship. They barely spoke, mainly engaged in arguments, and Elizabeth's attempts to reach out to her daughter were unsuccessful. The monstrous plan. During one of their romantic dates, when Alita couldn't bring Fernando the money he demanded, he became furiously angry. He cursed Elizabeth, screaming that she had plenty of money but wouldn't give any to her only daughter, then added that if Elizabeth were gone, adult Alita would inherit all her wealth, and they could live luxuriously. This terrible idea took root in Alita's mind, growing stronger each day. She constantly talked about how much she hated her mother, blamed her for all her misfortunes, and fantasized about how wonderful it would be if her mother disappeared. The young lovers began to devise a monstrous and cynical plan to eliminate Vasquez, also considering whom they could involve as accomplices. At that time, Elizabeth had nearly $3 million in her accounts, owned a successful business that could be sold, a large house in an elite area of the capital, several cars, and her life was insured for a significant amount. In the event of her death, all of this would be inherited by her only child, Alita. Elizabeth seemed to sense danger. She realized she couldn't separate her daughter from the mercenary and deceitful young man who negatively influenced her. The situation was escalating and could resolve in the most unpredictable way. Being an experienced lawyer, Elizabeth drafted a will stating that in case of her sudden disappearance or untimely death, all money and property should go to Ernesto Vasquez, her father.
She even managed to visit her parents and tell them about her decision. Meanwhile, Alita planned to stage the kidnapping and murder of her own mother by suspected criminals who would never be found. She and Fernando decided to involve a tough guy, Jorge Carnejo Ruiz, promising to pay him generously for his services. He accepted the offer without a second thought. A crime against his own mother. On January 24, 2010, 21-year-old Alita met with her 23-year-old boyfriend to finalize the plan for the crime that was to take place the next day. She was calm and collected, already envisioning how she would spend the millions she had inherited. The next morning, January 25th, citing ill health, Alita did not go to the university and stayed home. When her mother left for work, Fernando and Jorge were already lurking outside the house, waiting for Alita to distract the guard and sneak them inside. Alita approached the guard on duty and asked him to buy painkillers from the nearest pharmacy, which was only a 5-minute walk away. This brief absence allowed the young men to sneak into the house and hide in the master bedroom. When Elizabeth returned, Alita loudly dropped a glass in the kitchen, signaling her attackers to gather. When Elizabeth entered her room, Fernando knocked her to the ground and began choking her, with Jorge holding her down. Miraculously, Elizabeth managed to break free and run out into the hallway, where her own daughter kicked her in the head. While Elizabeth was unconscious, they tied her up. However, their plans were disrupted by a young servant girl, Maria Celine, whom Alita tricked into another room and locked her in. When Elizabeth regained consciousness, her daughter, boyfriend, and their accomplice brutally tortured her, trying to find out the code to the safe and passwords to her bank accounts. Terrified, Elizabeth knew her daughter was in trouble, but had always blamed it on Gonzalez's bad influence. Now, however, she saw the monstrous nature of her only daughter. Elizabeth managed to loosen the restraints and fought back against her daughter, scratching and punching her until Fernando knocked her to the ground. An enraged Alita kicked her mother and finally, in a fit of rage, grabbed a pillow and smothered her until she stopped showing signs of life. The trio then bound the lifeless body, duct taped her mouth shut, and placed Elizabeth in the trunk of her own car, staging a kidnapping. Alita then sent another guard to get medication, allowing her accomplices to drive off the property. She later freed a terrified Maria, falsely claiming that she and her mother had quarreled but made up, and that her mother had gone to bed. A strange story of a kidnapping and the search for a missing woman. In the morning, the maid was preparing breakfast as usual, but Alita came to the kitchen and told her that her mother had gone to work early because of an important meeting. After that, Alita left the house to go to her mother's workplace. There, she walked into the office of Jessica Hippo, her mother's best friend and accountant, and tearfully reported that her mother was missing and that she was receiving strange, threatening, and ransom calls. The accountant immediately started blocking the accounts to prevent the intruders from accessing them, reported the incident to the police, and left the office for a while. When she returned, Alita was gone and the office was in disarray, as if someone was looking for something. Later, it turned out that Elizabeth's will was missing, which Alita had learned about the day before by overhearing a telephone conversation. Using a key she had stolen from her mother, Alita had also taken a copy of the will and cash from the safe in her mother's study. Police arrived and inspected the house, interviewing the missing woman's daughter as well as the office staff, but gained no valuable information. All claimed that Vasquez had no enemies and no one had threatened her, so no one was initially listed as a suspect. The main theory was that it was a kidnapping for ransom. All that was left was to wait for a call from the criminals to receive further instructions and demands. A terrifying discovery and the first suspect. The day after Elizabeth's disappearance became known, it was reported that her car was found abandoned in a vacant lot outside of town. The interior was empty, but when law enforcement officers opened the trunk, they were shocked by what they found. Inside lay the lifeless body of a missing woman with signs of beatings. Forensic experts counted dozens of bruises, severe head trauma, and rope marks on the victim's body, indicating that the woman had been tied up and tried to free herself. It was also determined that Vasquez's death was caused by asphyxiation. Particles of blood and epithelium were found under her fingernails, indicating that she had resisted. It was now necessary to determine who the blood belonged to. At the lineup, Alita appeared as a grief-stricken daughter. She cried, wailed, and seemed almost unconscious. However, at the interrogation, she behaved quite differently. She was calm, even cold-blooded, and the questions of the investigators she was visibly annoyed. In addition, she constantly contradicted herself in her testimony. When the police decided to check the information about the calls from the kidnappers and sent a request to the cell phone company, it turned out that Alita did not receive any calls. It also turned out that in the days before and after her mother's disappearance, Alita had been in frequent contact with one Fernando Gonzalez, who they also decided to question. However, the young man either insisted on his innocence or remained silent. Irrefutable evidence and an arrest. Elizabeth's maternal grandparents were in charge of her funeral, while Elizabeth herself was indifferent, thinking only about how to get out of the situation, stay free, and save money. She called her father, who was already aware of what had happened, and crying, told him of her innocence and asked for help. Her father advised her not to talk too much and promised to get her out of the situation, even though he knew perfectly well who had committed the crime. However, he did not want his daughter to go to prison because it would have cast a shadow of shame on Alejandro, who at the time held the high office of Justice of the Peace and President of the Supreme Court, and was a powerful and respected man. Meanwhile, forensic results showed that the blood and skin particles under the deceased's fingernails belonged to her daughter. Alita tried to claim that she had a serious quarrel with her mother, and they briefly quarreled, but then made up. However, no one believed her anymore. Further inspection of Elizabeth's room with special equipment revealed numerous wiped traces of blood throughout the house, including in Alita's room, despite her attempts to wipe away the evidence. Alita's story that she had an argument with her mother in the evening, but then made up, and the claim that her mother left early for work the next morning and was never seen again, quickly fell apart. She contradicted herself, first saying she had not gone into her mother's room, and then remembering that she had. The ransom calls were completely fabricated by her. The testimony of the maid Maria Chalan played a decisive role in the case. She told how on the night of the crime, Alita locked her in a room from where she heard Elizabeth's screams and sounds of struggle, but could not help. After that night, she never saw her employer again, and Alita insisted that everything was fine with her mother, who had simply gone to work early. All of this led to the arrest of Alita and her boyfriend, the criminal trio, and the battle for the inheritance. Alita was arrested at her mother's house. Her boyfriend was detained a few hours later at an entertainment establishment, and the next morning, Jorge was arrested, betrayed by Fernando, who tried to blame the crime on him. It is noteworthy that it was Gonzalez who first began to testify, hoping that cooperation with the investigation will benefit him and help to mitigate the sentence. Meanwhile, Alejandro hired the best lawyers for his daughter, but realized that she will not be able to escape punishment. At the same time, he began to deal with Vasquez's inheritance, intending to take it for himself. Since the will had disappeared and the heiress was facing a long prison sentence, he claimed that he and Elizabeth had never divorced, but simply lived apart, remaining legally married. Meanwhile, Ernesto Vasquez, Alita's grandfather, decided to visit his favorite granddaughter in prison to look her in the eye, as he could not believe that the girl he had known and raised since infancy could commit such a horrible act. However, Alita behaved arrogantly, shouted, insulted the older man, and stated that she did not wish to see him again. This encounter upset him greatly, leading to a heart attack from which he was unable to recover and died 6 months later. The Vasquez family was unable to prove the existence of the will left in Ernesto's name, as the document disappeared from Elizabeth's office and the notary's database, seemingly taken care of by Alejandro. All documents and references to the couple's divorce also mysteriously disappeared, giving Alejandro the right to claim the deceased's inheritance. The trial and the verdict. Despite attempts by Alita, Fernando, and Jorge to shift the blame onto each other, the investigation successfully reconstructed the events of that fateful evening and established the role of each participant in the crime. It was also proven that the trio acted in a deliberate conspiracy, which greatly aggravated their guilt. A decisive role in the trial was played by the testimony of the maid Maria, who stated that Alejandro had threatened her, demanding that she give a different version of events, but she refused to comply. In May 2012, the court found all 3 defendants guilty. Initially, the prosecutor had requested that each participant in the murder be sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. While the men pleaded guilty, Alita continually played the victim. Fernando and Jorge were eventually sentenced to 28 years each, but Alita's trial was delayed. Alita claimed that the perpetrators were hired by relatives on her mother's side, who fabricated the inheritance story in order to take possession of Elizabeth's property and money. Her father held the same version of events. Attempts to declare Alita mentally ill and susceptible to manipulation by criminals also failed. This strategy, proposed by Alejandro, was to send her to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison, declaring her insane and incapable of fully and solely inheriting his wife's estate. Finally, in December 2012, the court delivered its final verdict, sentencing Alita to the maximum term of 30 years in prison. To this day, she and her accomplices are serving their sentences in prison. As for the disputed inheritance, its fate remains unresolved. In the spring of 2021, Alejandro died without becoming the only heir. The Vasquez family, through the court, seeks to exclude Alita from the list of claimants to Elizabeth's property, citing the fact that she is in prison for murder. Currently, the main claimant for the inheritance is Maria Movilla, Elizabeth's mother.